Before Apple Maps, Life 360, and algorithmic feeds, your only tracking device was the sun going down. And that total lack of surveillance is exactly what wired your brain for survival. Think back to the sheer, terrifying, beautiful emptiness of a summer afternoon in the mid-1980s. The screen door slammed behind you, the sound echoing down a quiet suburban street. And in that exact moment, you ceased to exist in the eyes of the adult world. You were a ghost on a rusted bicycle. There was no tether. There was no digital leash humming in your pocket. There was only the ambient noise of cicadas, the scorching heat rising off the blacktop, and a sprawling, uncharted neighborhood that you had to map entirely within your own mind. We didn't know it then, but we were participating in a profound evolutionary exercise. We were building cognitive armor. Welcome to the deep dive. We are exploring exactly why 1980s danger built better brains. Today, that silence is gone. It has been replaced by a persistent, invisible hum of data, tracking, and prediction. For the last analog generation, this transition hasn't just been annoying, it has been biologically devastating. We are living through an era of profound nervous system overload. The very architecture of our minds, built in the dirt and the risk of the 20th century, is rejecting the sterile padding of the 21st. We are seeing this rejection manifest in deeply painful ways. The first is a condition we now call algorithmic paralysis, the terrifying realization that algorithms dictate everything from what to watch, to where to drive, to what to think, eroding all organic decision-making. You wake up, and a machine tells you the optimal route to work. A machine curates the news that will perfectly trigger your specific emotional biases. A machine auto-populates your grocery list, queues up your evening entertainment, and suggests a precise response to a colleague's email. Your organic agency, the raw, human ability to simply wander, make a mistake, or stumble upon something completely unpredicted, is being meticulously extracted from your daily life. And right alongside this paralysis sits a deeper, more insidious exhaustion. We are drowning in hypersurveillance fatigue, the exhausting, low-grade anxiety of being constantly trackable by a Life 360, Apple AirTags, and Red receipts, and the loss of the right to disappear. In the analog era, disappearance was a fundamental human right. When you were out, you were simply out. Now, your exact geographic coordinates are broadcasting to a satellite in low Earth orbit. The glowing blue read receipt on a text message demands immediate cognitive attention, turning every communication into a micro-hostage situation. You are never unreachable. You are never truly alone, and your nervous system knows it. Society tells us that this total connectivity is the pinnacle of human progress. The media and modern parenting culture repeat two fundamental lies to justify this digital prison. The first lie is that tracking apps and smartphones make kids inherently safer than we were in the 80s. We equate surveillance with safety, confusing the ability to track a human body with the ability to actually protect the human mind. The second lie we are forcefully fed is that the world is statistically much more dangerous today than it was back then. But the hard empirical crime statistics completely destroy this narrative. The world was gritty, chaotic, and dangerous back then. 2. The difference wasn't the safety of the environment. The difference was a profound resilience of the children navigating it. When you strip away the nostalgia and look clinically at the data, you begin to understand the true modern digital exhaustion symptoms. Our bodies are resting in climate-controlled, ergonomic chairs, but our primitive threat detection centers are firing as if we are dodging predators in the savannah. This is why you must understand the psychology of 1980s childhood to make sense of your current mental state. You sit on the edge of your bed at the end of the day, staring at the wall, and your mind echoes with a deeply frustrating question. Why do I feel constantly exhausted even when I haven't done anything physical? The answer lies in cognitive load. In the analog days, when your physical body stopped moving, your brain was allowed to rest. Today, while your physical body sits motionless, your brain is processing thousands of micro-inputs, algorithmically generated outrage, and simulated social threats. Your amygdala is essentially running a marathon while your muscles atrophy. This leads to the second haunting question of our generation. Why does modern life feel so sterile and predictable compared to the 1980s? It feels sterile because the friction has been removed. Human joy, resilience, and memory are formed in the friction of reality. When everything is optimized, predicted, and delivered with zero resistance, the mind numbs out, which brings us to the third critical question. How does constant 24/7 digital connectivity actually alter adult stress levels? It eliminates the buffer zones. In the past, the commute home with a broken radio was a necessary psychological transition. It was empty time where the brain metabolized the stress of the day. Today, that buffer zone has been replaced by podcasts, urgent text alerts, and Slack notifications. The stress cycle is never allowed to close. It just loops eternally, bleeding into your sleep. But hold on to that feeling, because the exhaustion you feel is not a flaw in your character. It is a biological distress signal. And by the end of this documentary, you are going to discover the exact contrarian biological mechanism that allowed you to thrive in the analog grid, and precisely how to weaponize that dormant architecture right now to break free from the modern matrix. Let us go deeper. If you survived riding in the bed of a pickup truck, building sketchy plywood ramps, and drinking from a rust-tasting garden hose, your brain possesses a biological superpower that modern technology is actively trying to destroy. Think about the sheer, unadulterated danger of an ordinary Tuesday in 1986. You were 10 years old, miles from your house, drinking tepid water out of a hose that tasted heavily of copper and dirt. You were riding a bicycle with no helmet, flying down a steep suburban hill, completely dependent on the fading grip of a back pedal brake to keep you from crashing into oncoming traffic. The consequences of failure were immediate, physical, and entirely your own. No adult was coming to save you. And because of that brutal, beautiful reality, your brain was engaged in high-level risk assessment every second of the day. To understand the profound disconnect you feel today, we have to look at this through the lens of behavioral biology. Think of it this way. Your Gen X brain is a muscle car built for unpredictable, gritty off-road tracks. But modern society is parked on a frictionless, perfectly straight digital treadmill. The engine isn't breaking down from wear and tear. It's rusting from a total lack of resistance. You were engineered to solve complex, high-stakes physical problems in real time. Now, your daily challenges consist of remembering passwords, resetting routers, and navigating artificial corporate bureaucracy. The machine is rusting. Furthermore, navigating life through predictive algorithms and tracking apps is like wearing a psychological hazmat suit. Sure, it protects you from the dirt and the danger, but also suffocates your ability to actually breathe the air, leaving your cognitive immune system utterly defenseless. We have shielded ourselves from every conceivable physical inconvenience. And in doing so, we have bred an epidemic of profound psychological fragility. We have to anchor this in the psychology of 1980s childhood. Picture this deeply familiar contrast. Grainy, VHS-style 80s footage of a kid standing at a suburban crossroads. He is looking around, squinting against the late afternoon sun. He is disoriented. He doesn't know exactly where he is. But watch his eyes. Watch the cognitive machinery turning. He looks at the angle of the shadows. He recognizes a rusted mailbox or the peculiar bend of an old oak tree. He makes a gut decision, turning left, trusting his internal map to guide him home. His hippocampus, the brain spatial processing center, is lighting up, building permanent neurological pathways. Now, smash cut to today. A sterile, brightly lit modern interior of a parked Tesla. An adult is sitting behind the wheel, gripped by visible stress, entirely paralyzed because Waze just lost its GPS signal in a parking garage. They are surrounded by million-dollar technology, yet they are completely helpless. This juxtaposition highlights one of the most terrifying modern phenomena, spatial atrophy. The fear that we are losing our physical street smarts and gut instincts because we can't navigate our own towns without a screen telling us where to turn. When you offload your sense of direction to a satellite, your brain physically changes. The hippocampus begins to shrink. You stop noticing the landmarks, the topography, the subtle cues of your environment. You become a passive passenger in your own existence, blind to the physical world, waiting for a digital voice to issue a command. This is a direct symptom of bubble wrap culture. The deep societal dread that by sanitizing the world and making it 100% safe for the next generation, we have made existence entirely hollow and fragile. We have sanded down all the sharp edges of society. We have removed the seesaws, the towering metal slides, the merry-go-rounds that spun fast enough to throw you into the dirt. We believed we were eliminating risk, but we were actually eliminating the laboratory where resilience is forged. And in the sanitization, we suffered the ultimate casualty, loss of the third place. The mourning of physical, unsupervised environments where people used to exist and learn social hierarchy without digital recording or adult intervention. The local arcade, the cul-de-sac, the empty lot behind the strip mall. These weren't just places to waste time. They were complex sociological arenas. You had to negotiate rules, settle disputes, de-escalate physical conflicts, and establish social standing, all without an adult stepping in to mediate. You were forced to look another human being in the eye and resolve a problem. So, we must ask the clinical question: what happens to the brain when you remove physical danger from childhood? The human brain is a threat detection machine. It evolved to anticipate danger. When you remove actual physical risk from the environment, when there are no trees to climb, no wildwoods to navigate, no physical boundaries to test, the amygdala doesn't just turn off and relax. It turns inward. It begins to scan for microscopic, invisible threats. It starts interpreting a vague text message, a delayed email response, or an ambiguous social media post as a life-or-death existential crisis. By removing physical danger, we inadvertently created an epidemic of clinical psychological panic, which begs the question: did unsupervised play in the 70s and 80s wire our brains differently? Absolutely. The biology of unsupervised play requires self-regulation. When you build a highly dangerous, structurally unsound dirt bike ramp out of rotted wood and cinder blocks, laughing with your friends, your brain was calculating physics, trajectory, and physical consequence. Contrast that with today, a modern indoor playground with sterile primary colors, soft foam padding everywhere, and a parent sitting on a bench, entirely ignoring their child to doom scroll on a smartphone. The child in the padded room learns that the environment is responsible for their safety. The child on the rusted ramp learned that they alone were responsible for their survival. This profound loss of agency translates directly into our adult lives. How does algorithmic safety and predictive AI cause decision fatigue? It happens through the unseen effects of algorithmic safety. Because algorithms now make thousands of micro decisions for us every day, our neurological decision-making muscles are atrophying. When we are finally faced with a real, analog choice, the brain perceives it as a monumental, exhausting task. We are overwhelmed by the simplest variables, and we see this heavily in our physical movement. Is GPS navigation and smartphone reliance destroying our spatial awareness? Yes. It is destroying our connection to our immediate reality. We walk down the street staring at a glowing rectangle, completely oblivious to the architecture, the people, the temperature of the air. We are physically present, but psychologically absent. This is why the Gen X mental resilience is so highly coveted right now. We remember what it felt like to be entirely present in a specific geographic location. This brings us to the ultimate crossroads of our generation. The great trap of modern wellness. We call it the dilemma. It splits into two paths. First, there's a surface fix. People obsess over superficial hacks like changing their phone screens to grayscale, setting 15-minute app timers, or buying blue light blocking glasses, believing the screen is a root enemy. We try to negotiate with the digital prison. We download apps to track how much time we spend on other apps. We desperately fall for the myth, telling ourselves, I just need to find the right productivity or mindfulness app to cure my mental exhaustion. We also fall into the trap of looking at our modern children and falsely believing. Modern kids have a cognitive advantage because they have access to all the world's information. But raw data is not wisdom. Having the sum total of human knowledge in your pocket does not teach you how to read a room, how to de-escalate a street fight, or how to trust your gut when walking down a dark alley. The superficial hacks will never work, because they completely ignore the second half of the dilemma. They ignore the deep loss. What they completely ignore is the total erosion of uncharted autonomy. The biological necessity of stepping out your front door, completely untracked, unreachable, and forced to rely entirely on your own internal compass and street smarts to survive the day. Uncharted autonomy. The right to exist without a digital shadow. the right to get lost and find your own way back. Look at a wide shot of 80s kids in the street arguing over the arbitrary rules of a neighborhood game until dusk, figuring out the social dynamic entirely by themselves. They are loud, they are angry, they are laughing, they are alive. Smash cut to today. A teenager alone in a dark bedroom, their face illuminated only by the cold blue light of an endless, silent algorithmic feed that requires zero human interaction. The silence is deafening. The loneliness is absolute. Before we move to the final reframe, to the actual escape from this digital suffocation, I want to make an invitation. We are building an archive for the last analog generation. If you belong here, you are welcome to subscribe. Let us finalize the awakening. We traded the physical bruises of the 1980s for the psychological exhaustion of the 2020s. Today, we're going to look at the biology of danger and why a little bit of childhood risk was actually the greatest cognitive advantage you were ever given. For decades, the modern psychiatric and pharmaceutical industries have told you a very specific, profitable lie. You have likely internalized it. You look at your burnout, your racing heart, your inability to focus, and you think, my constant anxiety is just a personal chemical flaw, not a biological reaction to a hypersanitized life. You blame yourself. You think your hardware is broken, but your hardware isn't broken. It is starving. Mainstream culture treats the 80s like a cute neon-colored nostalgia trip. But sociologically, it was a masterclass in human adaptation. The truth that modern society refuses to accept is this: physical danger is a biological prerequisite for neurological self-trust. Let those words sink into your bones. Your brain fundamentally requires physical microtraumas, getting lost, scraping a knee, navigating a neighborhood dispute without adult intervention, to build the neurological scaffolding for resilience. You do not learn to trust yourself by being kept safe. You learn to trust yourself by surviving danger. The biological equation is undeniable. When you remove physical risk from a human's life, the brain compensates by generating psychological panic. If you don't bleed, if you don't fall, if you don't get lost, your nervous system begins to hallucinate danger in the form of social anxiety, chronic worry, and digital dread. We thought we were building a utopia, but the reality is bleak. Safety hasn't made us secure. It has made us clinically anxious. This realization forces us to re-examine the core psychology of 1980s childhood. We have to ask, why did 1980s latchkey kids develop higher levels of self-trust and intuition? Because when you walked into an empty house at 3:15 p.m., locked the deadbolt, and knew that you were the absolute highest authority in that structure until 6 p.m., you became sovereign. You had to cook your own food, manage your own time, and solve your own immediate problems. There was no safety net. The intuition you rely on today, that deep gut feeling that tells you when someone is lying, when a situation is turning bad, or when a risk is worth taking, that was forged in the quiet isolation of the latchkey afternoon. The modern paradigm completely misunderstood this. The dangers of overprotective parenting didn't just create a generation of children who don't know how to play outside. It created a generation of adults who are terrified of their own shadows. The profound loss of analog independence is a great tragedy of our time. So the ultimate, desperate question remains: can adults rewire their brains to regain analog resilience in a digital world? And more practically, how to apply 1980s risk-taking psychology to cure modern digital burnout? The answer is yes. Neuroplasticity does not end in childhood, but you cannot cure digital burnout with a digital solution. You cannot app your way out of algorithmic paralysis. You must force the brain back into the physical realm. You must practice the awareness action of purposeful disorientation. You must reclaim your uncharted autonomy. This means deliberately leaving the tracking devices behind. It means walking out your front door on a Saturday morning, leaving your smartphone on the kitchen counter, and walking into the physical world completely unrecorded. No GPS, no pedometer counting your steps, no camera to document the sky. You must allow yourself the profound luxury of getting slightly lost in your own city. When you remove the digital tether, you will feel an initial spike of panic. That is the hypersurveillance withdrawal. Lean into it, push through it. Within 30 minutes, your hippocampus will fire up, your eyes will widen. You will start noticing the architecture, the wind, the faces of strangers. You will reignite the internal compass that has been dormant since 1989. You will step out of the matrix and back into your own sovereign mind. We do not do this simply to reminisce. We do this to survive. In the back end of the internet, the algorithm labels our shared history with terms like modern digital exhaustion symptoms, psychology of 1980s childhood, biology of unsupervised play, effect of algorithmic safety, Gen X mental resilience, dangers of overprotective parenting, loss of analog independence, Gen X psychology, 1980s nostalgia, free-range parenting, analog living, digital burnout, life before smartphones, spatial resilience, helicopter parenting. And we watch the hashtags roll by. Hashtag Gen X, hashtag analog life, hashtag unsupervised play, hashtag 80 shieldhood. But to us, it isn't an algorithm. It isn't a trend. It is the blood and dirt foundation of who we are. We survive the grit, and we will survive the algorithms. Because deep down, beneath the endless notifications and the glowing blue screens, you are still that ghost on a rusted bicycle, racing the fading sun, trusting absolutely no one but yourself to find the way home. I want to know about your map. Go down into the comments and tell me the specific, physical boundary in your childhood neighborhood. The highway, the creek, the train tracks that you were told never to cross, and what happened the day you finally crossed it. The archive continues. Prepare your mind for the next chapter. Join us as we explore the AI noise epidemic and lost 90s boredom. Stay analog